Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the final panel session of Oceans 2020, Women Leadership in Marine Technology and Science. Our thoughts are with our colleagues on the Gulf as Hurricane Delta is now affecting you in what has been a very difficult season. This town hall is the first in a series of events hosted by MTS to kick off an initiative to highlight women in marine technology and science. The goal of this initiative is to create opportunities for connecting, informing, and inspiring women in marine technology and science to further understand the challenges that remain. The discussions for this began with Drs. Rita Caldwell and Chuck Wilson of the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative last December on how GOMRI and MTS could combine forces to celebrate and support more women in the field. Let me set the scene by offering two perspectives. Today, I read a report by Luba Kosova. It was titled, "The Missing Perspectives of Women in the News," which was commissioned by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The report came out on the 8th of September of 2020. It examined the news coverage of COVID stories through the lenses of three indicators of gender equality: women as sources of news experts, news stories leading with women protagonists, and the coverage of gender equality issues. Two notable findings from that report: every individual woman's voice in the news on COVID is drowned out by the voices of at least 3, 4, or 5 men. The women who are given a platform in the COVID story are rarely portrayed as the authoritative experts or as empowered individuals, but more frequently as sources of personal opinion or as a victim, people affected by the disease. Now let's look at our own Oceans Conference. We had a total of 103 speakers and moderators, of which 38% were women. In our student poster competition, women made up 30% of the participants, and they were also 30% of the winners. So before we get started, we'd like to interact with you by asking a few questions. We are going to use something called Mentimeter to share the questions and collect the data. Please take a moment to log on to menti.com, MENTI.com, in another browser window or on your mobile phone and enter this code, 2086562. That's also located in the chat. So let me go over that again, Menti, MENTI.com. And we're looking for you to let us know the sector, what you represent, .com, .edu, .gov, .mil. We'll let that go for a bit. Look for the code in the chat section, okay? Now, let's go to the second question. So where are you in your career? Are you a student, early career, mid-career, late career, retired and loving life? I don't think we ever retire. Oh, look at all the early career. That's great. Dots are still flying in. So those of you who may have joined us late, look at the chat. We're using menti.com. The code is 2086562. Okay, let's go to our third question. So have you experienced or witnessed gender bias in the workplace? Okay, Lisa, let's go to our next question. So if you have, Please, in one word, share how it made you feel. Again, we're on menti.com, menti.com, with the code 2086562. Great, Lisa, you can leave that up while I introduce our first speaker. So thank you so much. It's really important for us to know who's participating, and that helps our panelists to best frame their responses. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ken Bailey. Ken is a retired Army combat veteran and currently serves as the NOAA Director of the Office of Inclusion and Civil Rights. He is a leading practitioner in the areas of diversity and inclusion, equal employment opportunity, organizational development, strategic recruitment, affirmative employment, disability, anti-harassment, special emphasis, mentoring, and outreach programs. We welcome Ken today to share us the NOAA perspective on gender equity in their workforce. So Ken, if you can begin your presentation on the understanding the trends in NOAA. Ken, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that kind introduction, and of course, thank you for the invitation to speak today. I apologize for my scenery because I was actually had leave planned. That's probably why my calendar was free, and on the road traveling south. So forgive my makeup background here. But once again, I appreciate the invitation to be here. I pulled some general statistics, but also some things specific to NOAA. Hopefully it'll be of some value to you, and I'll dive right into it. Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. And I don't know if I can actually share the full screen, given.
I hope you're not driving, Ken.
No, I'm parked, of course. Yeah, I'm parked. You got it? Can you see it?
There it is.
Okay, let me see if I can increase the view a little bit. Did somebody leave the screen? I don't know. All right, well, let's see how it looks as we go through. So again, just wanted to give a quick overview. I hope I'm not being duplicating some of the information that you've seen, even though I think there might be a chance that I am, but hopefully it won't be to your disadvantage. So a couple of things to talk about in this quick 8 minutes that I have left. I'm gonna try to get through it. And these are some of the key terms that's on the charts that I have. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to go over them now. And as I go through the charts, I'll talk to you about them. The first one, what we looked at total workforce and the civilian labor force. So for government employees, we are compared to the civilian labor force. Most specifically, the occupational workforce, when we're looking at STEM, comparing kind of apples to apples. We'll get back to there. But as far as the total workforce, right now, based on the 2010 census, there's 48% females in the workforce and 52% males. And as of 2019, there were 28% females in the STEM field in general, and this is not across feds, this is in the workforce in general, and 72% male. And you'll see that NOAA actually kind of is right along that same trend. This one here shows the breakdown of the different positions that women hold in the STEM fields, and you can see biological scientists is way outweighs some of the other ones. Chemistry is slightly below biological science, but the computer and math and engineering fields are a bit low. And we talk about that in regards to some of the barriers to, entry into STEM for women as I go on. And Lisa, I haven't sent you these slides, but I'll send them immediately following. That way you can distribute them. And of course, just like anything else, there's a wage gap in there. Women earn 81 cents to the dollar that men earn, so about 19 cents less than what men earn in the STEM fields. And then when we look at NOAA, we have 6,207 STEM positions at NOAA, and women occupy 25% of that, 1,598. So again, we're right close to what the civilian labor force was, although they're a little higher. We are at 25%, but the civilian labor force was 28%. So we got 75% male and 25% female, or you should round it up a bit, 26 and 74. And this one is not for all of the STEM positions that we have, but the ones that are, have more. I think we probably use 50 or more that's in the position. What we call the major occupations for those of you that are not in the federal government, and those are our key occupations that help our core mission. And what you can see is from FY16 to FY17, first you can see the gender, right, by gender. So you can see women are underrepresented in all but 401 and 22. Part of that is not. I'm gonna shrink this because part of it left the screen. Sorry about that. Still. One more time. Okay, so you can see all women underrepresented in all of the occupations, with the exception of the 401 category, and right at there in the 13-15 category. And this was done in a comparison from FY10 to FY16. Then when we go to the next chart, what we try to do was, so all agencies don't make their data available, but what we tried to give you was a snapshot of, what NOAA looks like and compared to some of the other federal STEM agencies, excuse me. And what you'll see is, at the bottom bar is, again, the civilian labor force. So that tells you how many of these people, the occupational civilian labor force. So that means apples to apples. So that means if you're a fish biologist in the government, you do the same thing in the civilian workforce, although there may be some different nuances to it, varying from position to position. But this is what we came out to look like. And when you see the green arrow, that means we're above the civilian labor force representation. Where you see the red arrow, obviously below the civilian labor force representation. And the stars, those organizations were well above the civilian labor force, civilian occupational labor force. And you'll see there somewhere, again, they didn't share all of their data, but for the ones that they did share, we try to do a comparison analysis for you, comparative snapshot for you to take a look at. And I know it's probably pretty small for some of you, but when you get it, you'll have a chance to glance over it. Okay. And then I wanted to talk about, some some key factors perpetuating, gender STEM gaps, right? The barriers to getting, women into the STEM workforce. Gender stereotypes, right? STEM fields often viewed as masculine. Teachers and parents often kind of perpetuate that stereotype. Male-dominated cultures, because fewer women study and work in the STEM, these fields tend to, again, perpetuate inflexibility, exclusionary, male-dominated cultures that are not supportive and that are not attractive to women and minorities. Fewer role models, right? And we all know that if we don't see anybody that looks like us, we don't really vision it as something that we can do. So where we don't see that, then we don't strive for that as a goal. And then math anxiety, right? Some studies show that, women have challenges sometimes with math and are not, pushed to overcome that a lot of times. So that's work that we have to do both at the K through 12 and within the colleges and universities. How we can close the gap: instill a mindset of confidence, just like we would in any male. Give girls and women the skills and confidence to succeed in math and science. Improve STEM education and support for girls in early K through 12, as I mentioned. Have organizations work to attract and retain women in STEM in the major fields in colleges and universities, and urge STEM employees to recruit, promote, and hire women, and improve job hiring and retention and promotion and pathways for intentionally inclusive culture, right? And I don't know if you all heard, but in order to be inclusive, it has to be an intention purpose, right? It just don't happen organically. Actually, just the opposite happens organically. You'll have an exclusive culture without having an intentional effort to inclusion. And then the next two slides are just some of the references in the articles, some of the references and studies that's available to you all to take a look at. My contact information, and I'll pause for now and submit my time.
Great, Ken, thank you. That was really interesting to see the statistics across all of the federal agencies that you were able to pull together. We really appreciate that, and I know that during the question and answer on the panel, I'm sure we'll get some questions on that.
Sure.
So I'm going to now introduce our moderator, and then our moderator will then provide a presentation and introduce you to our amazing panel today. So Dr. Rita Colwell probably doesn't need an introduction, but I will go through it anyway. She's a distinguished university professor at the University of Maryland at College Park and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and president of Cosmos ID, Inc. Her interests are focused on global infectious disease, water, and health. Dr. Colwell serves as the 11th director of the National Science Foundation and co-chair of the Committee on Science, National Science and Technology Council. She also served as the editor for the Marine Technology Society Journal. In addition to her prolific publication record, she most recently chaired the National Academy of Science Consensus Study Report, Promising Practices for Addressing the Underrepresentation of Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine. She has also authored her book, A Lab of One's Own, One Woman's Personal Journey Through the Sexism in Science. We are really grateful to have Dr. Colwell with us today and serve as our moderator for our panel. Dr. Colwell, let me turn it over to you for the introduction of the panel and your presentation, followed by our question and answer session. So those of you who are on, start to populate the questions in the chat box. Thank you. Rita?
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you all. This is an outgrowth of discussion from folks in Gomery, where we decided that since we had such a stellar group of women that we should, that were involved in Gomery, that we should recognize them all women in ocean sciences, oceanography, marine sciences, etc. I'm going to do something unusual. I'm going to give you a background science lecture. I'm going to take the next 10 minutes, which I think I'm allowed, is that right? To give some of the work that I've been doing and explain how well or not it was received. So why don't we throw the slides up, and I'll go through very quickly, and probably not all of them, but this would be a normal lecture that I would be giving if I were just giving a standard lecture about the work that I've been doing on cholera and what it can teach us about COVID. Next slide. So one of the things that I've been working on is cholera. Explained here very quickly. It's a acute water-related disease. It occurs in pandemics. It's a major pandemic because it has the same total count in cases as COVID and in deaths as well, except that it has been occurring every year in some countries for the last 100 years. May I have the next slide quickly, please? Now, what we did, and here's where I'll give some background. I learned early on in the work in Chesapeake Bay that the cholera bacterium was associated with copepods. Now, you would have thought that I had spit in somebody's soup because this was received not with great enthusiasm. And the fact that I was a woman made it even harder to be accepted. This was according to several well-known medical microbiologists and physicians, that a bacterium that causes such major pandemics, first of all, should not be naturally occurring in the environment. It could only be occurring person to person. And if a man had made this discovery, it would be real. But a woman made the discovery. So it took about 20 years for it to be accepted. Next slide, please. We showed that it was associated with a copepod. We hypothesized that it actually is commensal or symbiotic. We haven't quite finished that confirmation, but at least here is a gravid female coated with Vibrios on the egg sac, and the Vibrios produce a powerful lytic enzyme which breaks the egg sac, releases the eggs into the water column. We have the next slide, please. So we developed this model. This was developed in 1970, 1975. It wasn't accepted until I would say 2000, maybe 2010. It's now in textbooks. We have the next slide, please. The other observation we made was back in 1975 when I was working in Bangladesh to prove that what I had found in Chesapeake Bay actually occurred as well in Bangladesh, in the Bay of Bengal, where cholera occurred year after year after year. Next slide. What we concluded was that in Bangladesh, collecting water for the family is the woman's work. And often, if the water source is a very great distance from the house, it's the girl's job to do. And if it's a very long distance in some rural areas, it means the girl doesn't get to go to school. As you can see, this pond is where everything is done: washing, collecting water for drinking, personal hygiene, and often the other corner of the pond would be the latrine. Obviously, the bacteria don't behave themselves and stay in one place. We have the next slide, please. And so this relationship with plankton led us to conclude when NASA launched Landsat in 1975, 1980, where they could measure chlorophyll and could measure sea surface temperature, sea surface height, that fit in beautifully with what we had learned about cholera, and that we could predict cholera, we have the next slide, by comparing the cases and the sea surface temperature, sea surface height with a correction That is, we measured chlorophyll and we measured the numbers of cases 6 to 8 weeks later, because chlorophyll is the phytoplankton bloom, followed by the zooplankton bloom, followed by the crash of zooplankton, releasing Vibrios into the water column, which is then drank, the water untreated by the citizens, and therefore the outbreak of cholera. Now, this was published 20 years ago. We were considered lunatics. This was wacky. We did manage to get it published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, probably because I had been elected a member of the Academy, and you're entitled to a paper. But I can tell you that it received a lot of criticism. But today, everybody is into the act of using satellite sensing in public health, predicting infectious diseases. May I have the next slide, please? The work that we have done, we've perfected to the point now where we can provide for cholera. Every month, we provide a prediction of risk in Yemen, and the British Aid Agency and UNICEF now use our prediction of risk to locate public health personnel, supplies, and safe drinking water tanks and so forth. And you can see the left is our prediction of highest risk in red. You can see on the right the actual cases. In this case, it was 2015. May I have the next slide, please? And so we now do real-time prediction. This is for 2017. The left is the colored chart, red, blue, and green, of the risk, and to the right, it shows the actual cases. So we now can predict 8 weeks in advance, high risk. We're working on 4 weeks, and we're providing, actually we provide every 2 weeks. We provide for the next month, we provide the risk charts. May I have the next slide, please? We've been able to modify this into a model, a more sophisticated model, which now takes into account some of the very elegant sensors on satellites that monitor people movement. And we've also coupled it with cell phone data so that it's a highly sophisticated and an even more accurately predictive model. Now the next slide, please. Let me actually, let me go to the next slide. I'll just make one more point. We've been able to develop a DNA sequencing bioinformatics technique that allows us to detect the presence of all pathogens, bacteria, viruses, protists, and fungus in samples, clinical, water, whatever. And this has allowed us to show that in Orange County, California, where during the drought, they had to use sewage water to supplement the river and freshwater sources for drinking water. We were able, next slide, to show that in fact, the input, sewage water, the gray area, all kinds of microorganisms, bacteria, particularly in this case. But once it's gone through millipore microfiltration, reverse osmosis, the only microorganisms that are left are the normal water bacteria that you would find in drinking water. Next slide. Same thing for viruses. By the time it goes through the treatment, we were able to show that no human viruses were present, but occasionally we would pick up a pepper virus for pepper plants, not infectious for humans, and lots of bacteriophages, but that's it. Next slide. And we also were able to show no transfer of antibiotic resistance to the normal water bacteria. That was a threat that was feared, but we showed that it didn't occur. May I have the next slide, please? Now, what's this got to do with COVID? COVID, as you know, is a dreadful virus. It's not a bacterium, it's a virus. And it affects the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, the intestines, the brain as well, because one of the typical characteristics is loss of smell and in some people taste. May I have the next slide? So what we did was by our DNA and RNA sequencing technique, we now can identify SARS and its variants, the virus and its variants by this method. And it's very rapid. We can do this within 20 to 30 hour from sample collection to actual report. Now the next slide, please, very quickly. When you get the infection, you release the SARS into the stool and into the wastewater. Next slide. This looks a little complicated, but it's not. The red line, from top to bottom, are the numbers of patients, 1 to 41. And across, the red shows positive throat culture, the standard test, and the yellow shows the continuing discharge into the stool. So long after by a clinical test, by the swab test, you're negative, you will continue to shed. And similarly, when you first get infected, for about a week, you'll be shedding it into the stool, but you won't be throat or swab positive for about 4 to 7 days after the initial infection. Next slide. So this allows us two things. First of all, we now are monitoring, and along with a lot of other scientists across the country, but we're working with the state of Maryland and monitoring sewage facilities, but also working with universities and dormitories, being able to show the presence of it. But more to the point, next slide. The model that this shows the distribution in Frederick, Maryland in the sewage. And the peak is a warning that there will be cases in the community. Now the next slide, and this should be my final slide. We've taken the model, the satellite model, measuring various environmental parameters, and we can now predict risk of COVID-19 in communities across the country, taking into account population density, taking into account all the other parameters. But this is where we have gone from oceanography to public health in a very direct way. We have the very last slide. I'm not going to go through this. I think I want to hear from our panel. Just keep going to the end. Last slide, please. What we're able to do is demonstrate. There we go. So I've told a lot of other stories in the book, A Lab of One's Own, and a lot of shared stories about other women's different difficulties in being accepted in their science. And so let's close on that, and let's go to the panel now. So what I tried to do is give you a behind the scenes negative receptivity to scientific discovery made by a woman that would have been accepted probably years earlier and implemented a lot faster. So this is for us to discuss what science, what public health loses, what the country loses when you only use half the brains of the country instead of 100% of the brains. And today, or just yesterday, 2 women won the Nobel Prize. And if we had not allowed them to pursue science, we would have probably still not know anything about the CRISPR and all that it can do for molecular biology and for life in general, understanding how we can modify life. So now I would like, Lisa, you to take over and introduce the rest of the panel, since I don't have my notes with me and I don't want to leave anybody out. And then let's get on with the discussion. I think Anne goes next, right?
Great, Rita, thank you very much. Yeah, we have 2 more outstanding members of our panel. Anne Hale-Melrise, she has a wide background in her career from government to NGO and now with Saildrone. And before she starts, I'll introduce our final panelist, Captain Christy Montgomery. It gives me great pleasure to call her Captain. She and I had the pleasure of serving together many years ago, and she has had an outstanding career and is currently serving as the executive assistant to the oceanographer of the Navy. Anne, let me turn it over to you, followed by Christy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Colwell, and thank you, Zdenka, for inviting me to participate in this discussion. 2 weeks ago, this group got together and had a planning meeting for how we wanted this session to go. But after that call, for the first time in my entire life, I charted my entire professional career to look at how the incidences of sexual harassment and gender bias had impacted my own path. And I was shocked. It was everywhere, and it influenced some of the biggest career decisions that I made over 35 years. And I've got to say, I was a little disappointed in myself that it took planning for this to get me to go to that reflection. So when I was first a freshman at university, at that time I wanted to be a marine biologist or an oceanographer, and I was grateful to get an internship the next summer at the South Carolina Marine Resources Division in Charleston, South Carolina. My internship was split between working for a fisheries age growth lab and working for the state oceanographer. So it was perfect, perfect for me. In the fisheries work, I would go to the commercial fishing docks outside of Charleston where the longliners came in with their catch and measure that catch. I was 20 years old and it was 1979, and it was not a good situation. Nor was working for a Russian oceanographer that was quite fond of vodka. After that summer, I still had a passion for the ocean and I'd learned a lot, but I was not about to put up with that culture. I returned to university and I changed my major to geography and started my career in remote sensing. There are several other inflection points very similar to this example throughout my career. I've had a fabulous career and I've been lucky to work on the development of very many impactful technologies and applications. I've worked, as Zdenka said, in state government for the state of South Carolina, for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I've run several commercial companies. I've been a Beltway bandit, and I started a nonprofit that still is in existence today, and I've recently transitioned to Saildrone. And I'm sorry to say that these cultural problems exist across that entire spectrum. Through my career, the majority of the issues that I dealt with were sexual harassment, and not that many around bias, frankly, probably because I'm so hard-headed. But more recently, I experienced a gender bias that brought me great frustration. Just 6 years ago, I was the CEO of a startup commercial weather satellite company. We had great technology, we had a great team, and I had to go raise millions and millions and millions of dollars to fund the business plan. The most overt sexual bias I ever witnessed was walking the streets of Silicon Valley and pitching to venture capitalists who invest in space, which is the ultimate boys' club. It was blatant and it was heartbreaking. However, things are changing. Things are getting better. They are better than they used to be, but we still have a long way to go, and we need to develop a consensus on how we're going to get there. Thank you.
Terrific.
Christy.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you all for having me on the panel today. It's just really an honor to be asked. As Zdenka said, I started my career actually with Zdenka in the United States Navy. And so like Anne, I looked back over my career in the Navy and in the STEM field to find where I thought I had experienced potentially some either harassment or was the recipient of bias. But what continued to come up for me actually was that I have been absolutely lucky, and I've got to call it lucky because I see the structural representation of women across both academia and government and the industry. And I realized that I was very lucky that even going back to my undergraduate degree in geology, I had a very, very strong female mentor who was a professor of sedimentary geology. She went on to actually run the geological department at my university. She, for me, was what a scientist looked like. And I know that's going to be a panel question later, but as I was, getting my degree, I didn't have a distinction about whether or not a scientist or a geologist was a man or a woman, because I had perfect examples in front of me of both. And then when I came into the Navy, my very first command in the Navy was actually at the National Naval Ice Center, and Stanka was my commanding officer. And so my very first experience coming into the Navy was seeing a strong naval officer, a strong scientist who was extraordinarily smart, leading my entire command and leading that command through the significant events of September 11th. And so my vision of what a strong leader should be, whether in the Navy or in science, has always included a female in that role. And so as I look forward, one of the things that I am trying to continue to recognize about my role and position now is that I can be that person for somebody else. And I can help empower other women in those positions to be those role models for other people as well. And so those are the opportunities that I think we all have to continue to seek. And we all have to continue to, as women, lift each other up in those positions of leadership in both the STEM fields, in academia, in industry, and in the government service. And so I'm just really thankful to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the question and answer session.
Well, terrific. I must say that, Anne, you're absolutely right. I found that when I started a company that the sexism and the rudeness that you have to deal with in business is extraordinary. I mean, I thought it was kind of tough in academia, but my goodness, it's like not even a boys' club. It's like a tree house where they're sort of swinging from branches to branches. They're so primitive in their behavior. And I do hope that we can see this change, because there's so much that's lost by not bringing women completely into the leadership aspect of science and business. And Christy, I think you've been very lucky, but that makes me feel good. It means that things are changing. I'm going to turn it over to Liesl with the questions, and I guess we can go from there. I'm supposed to ask the questions, but I don't have them in front of me, but I think we can have a good discussion anyway. So thank you.
Great. So let me remind all of our audience, and I do see we have a good audience here. Please put your questions in the question and answer. And Lisa, do you want to do questions, or would you like me to?
Why don't you go ahead, because I still have the construction noise in the background.
Great. Okay. So we've got a couple of questions, but we're looking for your questions as well. And I know Lisa will help me monitor those. But the first question to all of our panelists is, how can institutions, companies, organizations change mentorship or management structures to better protect people from potential harassment and inequity? So
why don't we ask Anne to start that one, because I think business is the hardest place to make the change.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've seen it in both places, but I do agree, as Christy said, mentorship is everything, right? And having that North Star. I had a number of women who were North Stars for me. One, Dr. Colwell, you know well, is Margaret Davidson. Margaret and I were friends and colleagues for a long time. I think we need strong mentors, but I also think we need corporate accountability, whether that's the federal corporation or a commercial corporation. As an example, I once ran a US-based company that was owned by a European conglomerate. They had over 100 companies around the world, and twice a year they'd bring everybody to the Netherlands, where they were based, to do business planning. At one of those events, I saw a very senior executive member of the corporation sexually harass a very young woman a very young professional. And after speaking with her to make sure she was okay, I went directly to the chief executive officer of the corporation, because the buck has to stop there. The culture has to be there. The accountability, in my opinion, has to be there. This was a very male-dominated culture, a very industrial company. And the gentleman, the offender, had a reputation. But within 6 months, because the CEO knew, and because he knew I told him, the offender was gone. He was out of the corporation. He was exited out. And that was very efficient. And I had a couple of other executives in the company come to me afterwards and said that was really risky. What they didn't know was I wasn't going to stay there anyway. But I think it has to start at the top. And I think there have to be management structures where human resource professionals or people like Ken have the requirement to go directly to the executive in charge of the entire organization.
Well, Christy is a very, well, I have to say, speaking relatively to me as a young person, do you feel intimidated or do you think any of your colleagues, female colleagues, would feel intimidated to go to the top, as it were?
Yeah, Rita, thank you for the question. I think that, you know, I would hope that nobody would feel intimidated to report instances of sexual harassment or bias in the United States Navy, because every message from our leadership on down has been that this should be a place of no tolerance for that sort of behavior, right? But every command climate survey I've ever seen, when the question is very specifically asked about whether or not members feel comfortable reporting incidences of sexual harassment, there is still an answer on some occasions of no. And I think the strongest response for why people feel that that is not something they can do is a sense of potential retribution or shame or embarrassment in the organization. And so, like Anne, I really have to agree with the outward level of accountability that really needs to be inculcated in all cultures, of no tolerance for that sort of behavior, and then a very demonstrated willingness to pursue incidences of that behavior and eradicate them from whatever organization they're existing in, so that everybody can feel comfortable sharing their ideas and sharing the workspace. And so I really agree with Anne, it's accountability. And, you know, I think I personally feel like it's probably getting better, at least in the Navy. But I know that there are cases out there that are still being reported today, and the ability to appeal and to continue to shed light and shed sort of an open awareness on the culture and the problems is what I think has really continued to benefit the Navy, is to own up to it, to fess up, to evaluate that all the time, to ask those questions, those hard questions as often as they can, and to confront their own failings whenever possible, and work to improve and change the culture and the workplace for others that follow.
Ken, what do you think really works from your experience, Ken?
Hi, Dr. Colwell. Thank you. I really don't have much to add, because the answer that they gave was my exact same answer. It's less about changing the mentoring and leadership structure and more about accountability. We got all kinds of organizations, at least I know in the government and the military, that has, you know, that's a statement that has zero tolerance for you know, sexual harassment, but sexual harassment is not always handled appropriately when reported. And back to your question also, I think less the word is intimidation, and more back to what Christy said is fear of reprisal as to why women often don't come forward. So, you know, for us as leaders, it's our responsibility to provide an environment that's psychologically safe, physically safe too as well, right? But also psychologically safe for women to understand, or, you know, whoever is sexually harassed, that they can come report that, and that when they report that, that some, you know, action behind it will happen. Now, that's one of the key things behind it, is that people don't always get to see the action, right? Because Privacy Act doesn't allow you to say, well, we did so or so, unless you're in the military, you can publish some of that stuff. But in, you know, in the government, you can't do that. So they don't always know by seeing, you know, what the punishment was. But what they will know is if there's a behavioral change that the harasser has been addressed. So, you know, that's a way leadership can show, by holding people accountable who caused those offensive, and provide an environment that's safe for women and whoever are sexually harassed within their work environment.
I think one of the things we need to do is just have more of us around, in the sense that when there's a greater, when you have a greater diversity, first of all, it's more profitable. Business, it's been shown over and over again, when you have diversity of all kinds in business, you make more money because you're getting more input from representatives of more customers, so to speak, in a very blunt, crude way. What's another question that you'd like us to address, Zdenka?
Yeah, we've got some very interesting questions coming in from the audience. So let me give one of those questions. I've enjoyed listening to all of your experiences. I struggle with knowing when to assert myself and when to back off. I don't want to back off because I can't tell if they don't understand my point or if they're biased against me. But I also know it's possible that I'm in the wrong and just don't know it yet. How do you recognize that fine line of being assertive or backing off?
Well, I would put it in the vernacular. It's from the criminal to the clueless. Criminal is obviously physical attack, and that's criminal. Clueless, I think, are the remarks that are made that are just as the questioner has described. How do you really take it? And I think it's best, I'll have the others contribute, but I think it's best, first of all, to have a sense of humor. And I think it's important to be polite and direct and say, you know, that remark is offensive, or at least it can be interpreted as offensive. For example, going up to the podium to give a talk, the last thing you want to hear is, my, don't you look nice? I'd much rather have the talk being heard and then a good question about the idea. So I think there's a kind of not understanding on the part, really on the part of the guys, of what really is clueless. And I think the line between clueless, offensive, and criminal, these demarcations, I think the criminal is obvious, the clueless is pretty obvious, and what kind of goes over the line is not so easy. So let me have Anne, why don't you weigh in, and then Christy?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I am relentless in my pursuit of what I want. I have a great sense of humor, and I can be cold as ice. And I agree on the criminal to clueless. I think in between the one, you know, clearly we're not even deal with the criminal. The clueless, you know, we're not going to be able to do a lot to educate them, and they choose to be clueless. What really gets under my skin is the intentional. And I think being direct, hopefully having some sense of humor about it, and calling it out. Making sure you're right, you know, kind of reflect internally before you start down this path to make sure that you have interpreted the situation fairly. But I have generally found that, particularly in a situation where I feel as if I'm not being listened to, or being demeaned, that often shuts somebody down.
Christy?
Yeah, I think I would have to pick up on the aspect of self-awareness. I am, as Anne said, I am very sort of frank sometimes in my discussions and very forthright with speaking up and speaking out what is on my mind and what I'm thinking. And I think because of some gendered norms that even women hold, that can be perceived sometimes in a negative way. And so, but I also have to recognize that that way of behaving is not always appropriate for every engagement. And so when I think about areas where something didn't go as well as it should have been, or my idea wasn't accepted, or somebody talked over me, or there was something going on, I always try to pause and reflect, do some self-reflection, and just make sure that, you know, if I was put in their shoes, or if the, you know, I was sitting on the opposite side of the table, would I have taken what I said in a way that was just more of a personal affront just because of the dialogue, or do I really feel like, given what I said and given this person's past behavior or performance, or, you know, demonstrated interaction with me, if I feel like there's something else going on there? And then I kind of replied to one of the questions in the chat that I found the best success in having, just like Anne said, direct conversations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the group setting, but just pulling somebody off to the side and expressing to them that the way that they came across, or the way they behaved, just wasn't right. And it felt like they weren't valuing me because of something that I can't control. And so it's just, it's difficult because you don't want to have to feel like the onus is on you to do all of that internal thought process and thinking about how the other person feels, because you think obviously they didn't think about how I felt, right, when they said whatever it was that they said. But you know, I think that so far in my career, the best way that I've had sort of, I don't want to say converts, but people who have an aha moment, or have kind of admitted to the fact that they didn't really understand that they had this bias, but they can see how it had come across, was just having that personal conversation. Now, sometimes that's just not possible, and sometimes you do have to pick your battles, and you have to figure out if your interaction with this person is, you know, if they are going to change, and if it's worth engaging with them, if it's worth the emotional cost to you of engaging with them, if you don't feel like they're going to be receptive to what you have to say. And so it's hard to have a right answer for every single opportunity.
I would just add that you don't have to convert the other person. You simply have to make it clear that that particular instance and the way it was phrased is offensive, and maybe in the future they might not want to say it to another woman.
Yeah, it helps if you have allies there along with you that can, you know, co-sign with you to let people know that they kind of got a bad impression about those things as well.
So what's the next question that's come in from the audience?
They are coming in fast and furious, and we will try to answer what we can live. We're going to go a little bit after our 1 hour schedule, because we're just now getting into some great conversation. And those that we can't, we will answer in due course, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation. I found this one interesting. Oftentimes it feels as though women have to deal with it and push to make it better for the next generation. Well, we all want a better world for the next generation. How do you not become jaded in your careers?
Well, that's a very good question. I guess it's because you surround yourself with good guys.
Yeah.
I guess I was lucky. I had a very kind father who believed education was important for everybody, not just boys. And I married very well. I had 62 very happy years with a partner who, Jack, was very supportive. So whenever things got really bad, I'd go home and either complain or cry, and Jack would be there. So I guess that is probably the best solution that I can offer at the moment. Yeah, you should not become jaded, but let me hear from my colleagues, Anne and Christy. Anne, Do you have anything to, I think you're a mute.
I'm back. I'm back. Yeah, I agree. I think that just the vast majority of the situations I faced with, I felt as if I had to just deal with it, right? And I wasn't going to be able to change them. I had to change my situation. And I, like you, Rita, had a dad that really valued all 5 of his children getting a great education. He believed that we should all have the same chores. That's why he gave me a riding lawnmower when I was 12. And I'm also lucky enough to have married a man that was very supportive of my career and perhaps one of my biggest cheerleaders. And I remember coming back from, California trying to raise money, and he would be just as furious as I was. So, you have to realize it's not your fault, but it is your burden. And you got to deal with it in whatever personal way you can.
Christy.
I think there's always a danger of getting jaded by the experiences that you have had. But the best anecdote for me is to engage with the next generation of women that are coming up in the organization and see how just absolutely smart and fearless that they are. I had an opportunity to be a commanding officer for our training command, and the training command has an initial sort of a session course where all of the naval oceanographers have to come to this course as their sort of foundation setting course on oceanography and meteorology. And so I got the opportunity to see naval oceanographers in their infant stage, as they're coming into the Navy, and so many strong officers of both, male and female, all races, all cultures, all ethnicities. And there is nothing that I have found that does my soul more than just seeing the talent that is coming through the front door and just sinking back my efforts rather than, dwelling on myself and feeling like it is a hard burden to carry, but just sinking that energy into them and propping them up has been the best thing that I've had to do.
That's great. Well, I've gotten my retribution as well by producing 2 very independent daughters. And now I have a very independent granddaughter. So I think we can have an influence. So thank you. Another question?
And certainly, I expect that you also have experienced bias and harassment in your career. Can you give us a bit of your perspective from how you have dealt with these challenges and how you remain as positive as we have seen you through these practices?
Well,
Now, so just a second, Rita, that was to Ken.
oh, good.
Yeah.
For me, so I can't say that it's not cognitively challenging at times, because it is. And, of course, the events of the, recent social unrest and civil unrest cause a reflection upon that. But going back to part of the previous questions as well is, I try to stay encouraged by keeping my eye on the prize. What's important to me and what I'm trying to accomplish, and, who I'm trying to accomplish that for, right? Much of my life as an adult has been living for, my children, and now my children and my grandchildren. Just as my entire work life has been in public service. So those are the things that keep me inspired and keep me going, and even in times of frustration. Where I notice and where bias has directly impacted me, I try to address it head on. That's not always the best thing to do, right? So, feedback and engagement is, one has to be time and appropriate when having discussions regarding those things. But fortunately, I can say that those times have been very minimal in my life and in my career, although I have had those experiences. So I just try to keep my head up, try to educate people where I can. That's part of the reason why I'm in the field as a practitioner for both EEO and diversity and inclusion. So I try to make people smart about, the things that they weren't smart about with me, even though it's not the exact same person, but I try to teach, the future generations as they go and the current leaders that's here, how to do things better.
Well, Ken, you're one of the good guys.
I appreciate that. I try to be very much so. Thank you.
And I like your statement, keep the eye on the prize. You're right.
Yeah. So we're going to go through 2 more questions, and then we've got some more Menti polls. And again, we really have had some wonderful questions coming in, but I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And here's a question. Are there any examples, best practices for hiring employees that address systematic issues in racism, sexism, socioeconomic status, ageism, and bias to ensure that we can attract a more diverse workforce that ensures equitability and inclusive environment? And Rita, I might also say you can address this from, the grant process and how do we get that diversity in grants. So, what are some of those practices, both in, hiring for a more diverse workforce and in that grant arena? So
a couple of very, very strong recommendations straight away. You've got to have a selection committee that's diverse. And you can't just have one woman, one African-American, one Hispanic. You have to have a committee that's properly diverse. And then another strong recommendation is that you don't, what you should make sure you do is when you're going to evaluate, let's say, individuals for a position, you shouldn't allow pre-committee discussion interactions. In other words, your assignments to review and comment on an individual, you shouldn't be asking some other members of the committee prior to the committee meeting, because then you start coalescing ideas. You need to come to the committee meeting for a frank and open discussion that hasn't been pre-cooked, so to speak. And then it would work really sometimes just simply taking the names off, because it's been shown that if the name is Jennifer and the name is John, even though it's identical in terms of qualifications, John's going to get a leg up. But that doesn't always work, because then you can usually determine from the academic institution or from the previous job who the person is, but it helps. Those are my ideas, but I want to hear from Ann and Christy and from Ken. Ann, why don't you come in?
Yeah, I gotta say, I was employed by Booz Allen Hamilton as an executive there for about 4 years in the late 2000s. And they had a very good system of trying to change their culture. And they worked hard at it. And diversity breeds diversity, right? And I always said that, I always believed that. I wanted to see that, but I had never been, most of my career as a remote sensing scientist, we're in very male dominated fields. But when you get into a management consulting field where you're working with engineers to economists to administrative professionals, it was a very broad set of professions, and it was more diverse. And I remember being in a meeting, it was a big meeting, it was like 30 people working on a big proposal. And I looked around the room, I was like, wow, how'd this happen? Well, this is really cool. And then I listened to the conversation, and the results were so much better because there were so many voices in the room coming from different perspectives. I think that diversity breeds diversity. I think a system that we need to put in place is, to measure that systematically across. And I know Ken provided some examples, but I think we need more attention to measuring that systematically across all of our different economies.
Christy?
So one of the things that I would suggest that has worked, and it's trying to work in the Navy, they just recently removed photographs from records when folks are being reviewed for promotion or selection opportunities. In past, your photograph was the first thing that popped up when your record came up. And so I don't know if there's any other more prominent structural bias that could be introduced to a selection panel than showing a photograph. And so I was really happy to see as the Department of Defense and the Navy are trying to tackle diversity or getting better at diversity, pardon me, that they're looking to equalize the professional record rather than the gender or the appearance of somebody. And so in all cases, when you can, I would suggest that in hiring panels, in awards panels, anything that you have to do to either promote or select somebody, have somebody in the HR organization try to neutralize gender or race or ethnicity from the award or selection process, whether that's removing pronouns, whether that's removing photographs, something that will allow the recommenders or the panel members to just evaluate the merits of the record or the package that's in front of them, I think is a big step that we can make to sort of change the structural barriers that might prevent folks from getting the appropriate reward and recognition they deserve.
Terrific. Ken?
Yeah, I would add to that just to say that that is one of the most significant ways to impact change, right? Because that will cause a behavioral shift that the person will have to make involuntarily, right? Because as we know, there are people that like the status quo. They don't want to see change. So they're not even trying. But having a process that eliminates, all of these things that are identifiable to, name, race, ethnicity, gender, all of those things will help, is one of the biggest ways to help that. You can do that both in the resume review process, the grants review process, and also in the actual hiring process, right? And the part of the discussion and making it a blind interview all the way around. So that is one of the most significant ways to help kind of force behavioral change. And I would add to Dr. Colwell's remark about, not having these pre-discussions, right? Because it promotes groupthink, right? And allow everyone to think independently and make an independent assessment. And then based on whatever scoring system you have in place, so make your selection.
Terrific.
Great. So I'm going to ask each of the panel members just to give very brief final comments on anything that we've talked about today. And then Liesl and I will wrap it up with a couple more mentee questions. And we're really holding the audience. And I really appreciate everybody staying over time. This has been an amazingly robust conversation. So I'm going to reverse the order this time. Ken, I'm going to put you on the spot first to give us final comments, and then we'll go back around the room.
Well, for the most part, I would just say first, thanks to you all for your interest and your investment and your energy and all that you do, and your contributions to the working in the STEM fields and how that contributes to your organization, to our military, to our government, and to our country, and in many cases throughout the world. So thank you for everything that you do. I'm an ally. I'm doing this work because I want to see things different. It's not just me collecting a paycheck. I'm very passionate about what I'm doing here. open to discussion for you. My contact information is on the slide deck. So please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to engage again. Actually would love to, if you want. So please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you. Christy. Captain Montgomery. I'm so thrilled to say that once again.
Thank you. Thanks, Nika. Thank you all for, again, inviting me to this panel. These sorts of events sort of replenish my bucket. You know, sometimes you take a lot out of the bucket from day to day, whether it's dealing with COVID or dealing with the bureaucracy at the Pentagon. But these sort of events really put energy back into my bucket. And as Ken said, I know there were some questions about how do you find a mentor, how do you find opportunities for women in leadership. I would just say reach out to me, reach out to anybody on the panel. I think there's a new new LinkedIn group for women in marine science and technology, and so we found in the female Navy officers, there's a Facebook page for that, and that has been a source of inspiration and a source of knowledge and support. And so just keep engaging for those in the audience, and then to the wonderful panel that I've had an opportunity to get to know a little bit. Just thank you so much. I'm so impressed by all of you, and I've just had such a pleasure engaging. So thank you. Thank you,
Christy. Ann?
Yeah, well, thank you, Zdenka, for asking me to participate. It was enlightening for me. As I shared earlier, I had never really walked back through my career to look at all those markers of how it's influenced how my life has unfolded. To those who are participating, particularly who are early in your career, find a North Star. Find someone who you really respect, both technically, intellectually, and emotionally, and keep looking at that North Star. You belong here. You are good enough. Keep telling yourself that. Keep working hard, and make sure to be passionate about what you do and have a little fun along the way. That passion will inspire you to continue to push through.
And Rita, if you'll close us out.
Sure, this has been terrific. Superb panel, and great opportunity to air some of these issues. I'd like to put this in the global perspective. Very clearly, diversity is not only dealing with individual growth and development, but it really provides national security, stability, economic development, and strength. If you have 100% of the brains operating and not just 50%, the country's stronger, the economy thrives, and I think even national security benefits. So what we do in bringing diversity is, I think, strengthening the whole country. And I would really close by saying that believe in what you do, and don't let the turkeys get you down. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rita. So we're almost finished with our session. Just hang in there a bit more. I would be remiss if I did not thank Marie Colton and Lisa Holtling, who, along with myself, put this together. And it's just been a joy to work with Marie and Lisa on this. Marie and I go way back to Navy and NOAA days. And Lisa, of course, as I have always said, is the hardest working member of MTS. So I certainly want to thank them. We just want to take a couple of final minutes to find out how you all would like to engage with us. So we're going to go back to Menti, menti.com, and we're going to ask you engagement. And again, that code is 2086562. And before, and as you're answering those questions, I want to take a moment and talk to you about a couple of upcoming events. We've got a really special event coming up on the 21st of October. If you have not been made aware, there's a documentary called Picture a Scientist. It was officially selected as a 2020 Tribeca film, and it chronicles the groundswell of researchers who are writing a new chapter for women scientists. And MTS and GOMRI and NASA and NOAA and IEEE OES are sponsoring this film. It'll open up on the 20th, and we will have a, thank you, and we will have a panel on the 21st. You can sign up at the MTS website as well as at the Oceans website. So I ask you to do that. And Liesl, do we have results from the Menti question? Can you get us back to that, or there you go. So it's good to see. So this will give us an idea of how to structure the program. As Liesl has put in the chat, we have a new LinkedIn page, and we actually have another panel coming up on at AGU. So there's the topics, and I think we have one final Menti question. So how would you like to engage with us? How is it best? So if you can answer this final Menti question. And as you're answering that, let me provide some closing remarks. I'd really like to thank our panelists today. I think you will agree that they are all stellar in their careers and are willing to give time to this important topic. And I really, really appreciate that they have been with us today. I, as the president of the Marine Technology Society, want to hear from you as well. This is obviously a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I hope that we, along with the other organizations represented today, can move forward with women in technology and science. I ask you to visit the exhibits at Oceans, attend the tutorials and workshops next week. We will have our closing ceremony on the 14th, but all of the content will remain on demand until the 21st of October. And we really hope that we'll be able to see you, hopefully in person, for Oceans in 2021. Our next Oceans is in Porto, Portugal in May, and in San Diego in September. And with that, I wish everybody a good weekend, and I thank you again for your participation. And that concludes our section. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.